Hi, this is Peggy from RAW. So today our guest is a multitasker, Jon Aikman. Jon is first the CEO of Nordai. So it's a company that provides AI solutions for the financial services industry. He's also an adjunct faculty at Queen's University and the owner of Metrix Law that provides law and consulting services for alternative investors. So we have a busy man with us today. So thank you so much for being here, Jon.
Thank you very much, Peggy.
No, that's great to have you. So let's get started with the first question. So from your perspective, what will be some of the major lasting impacts that COVID will have on the financial services industry?
Well, I think that it's important to put COVID-19 in its appropriate categorization or understanding of what kind of an event this is. This is one of the largest and most significant economic events in history, and it is it's not over. Mm-hmm. So how do I think it will impact financial services? It will impact all sectors, and because financial services really plays a kind of master role in all these different sectors, whether it's oil, energy, real estate, whatever it is. I think that we will see long-lasting and important impacts in a broad range of sectors, and that's going to have a significant impact on financial services, how it's delivered, and the kinds of services that people are looking for in the future, I think.
If you look at it, you're a lawyer by training. So if you look at the regulatory aspects of that and the potential changes to regulations, what do you see might be coming down the pipe?
Well, it depends on where you're looking. But if you're looking, I mean, Europe, as well as North America, in the United States, for example, you have some pretty significant impacts on fintechs for that were happening to kind of traditional smaller banks. So fintechs were taking more and more of the businesses of what would have been smaller community banks. So community banks were closing really at a record rate before COVID-19. You had really significant competitive pressures where you had the banking system with prudential oversight and risk management and a variety of different issues that they have to face in terms of their infrastructure. And then on the other side, you have fintechs, which operate with very limited regulatory, if any, kind of regulatory oversight sometimes, depending upon their location. So there are challenges that existed before this. This has exacerbated some of those in the way people are impacted by regulations. I would expect that some regulations will come in to protect some of the larger incumbents in the area, that they'll try and, there may be issues of protecting some of the big financial institutions, because they're some major employers. So you can imagine that if everything moves to kind of an online platform, a digital platform, or that there's a significant move in that direction, which is underway, then you may find that that regulators are trying to manage that kind of process. Otherwise, you would have a fintech which may only have a few people working for it, able to operate and compete very successfully against very large institutions with huge numbers of people, because the normal thing that would protect a financial institution in that situation might be its distribution network, might be the fact that they have hundreds or thousands of different outlets for their services. Now, all of a sudden, with people not wanting to enter into banks or to the traditional places where they might be doing things in a different way, then ultimately you may find that what was a competitive advantage turns into a competitive disadvantage. And regulators are very sensitive to the fact that they don't want these large financial institutions to be impaired significantly. So these are the financial institutions that are very large major players, and they also are some of the ones that have what we would consider to be systemic risks associated with them. So if they were to have challenges, that would be a very significant issue from a regulatory perspective. So I would expect that there'd be some ways that I think that fintech has had a good start. It's going to be a transition to becoming more like a financial services institution, and then banks. I mean, they're going to kind of push to the center. So it's kind of the anti-barbell, where large institutions are going to have to get nimble, and small fintechs are going to have to get more sophisticated in how they're managing their risks, managing their regulatory obligations, because I would expect that those would continue to increase with time, and as people see the trend towards more of a digital platform. It's going to be obvious that fintechs are playing more of an important role, and I've seen that and been part of certain kind of groups thinking about that. So like in the United States with the FDIC, or even the SEC, and a variety of other institutions like the Federal Reserve are focused on this issue because they see these trends. COVID-19 may transform the industry even more.
Yeah. So you're speaking about the Fed. So what do you see COVID-19 will be impacting in terms of global financial order and financial stability?
Well, I think it's important to recognize that, if you look historically, at the global financial crisis was about a 5.7% drop, and it took 5 quarters to get there. Mm-hmm. And then with the current COVID-19 crisis, you're talking about probably more than 15% drop in GDP globally, and it took us less than 2 quarters to get there. So this is the most severe and the largest drop. So I think it's hard to understand where this will go, because I think we're still in the midst of it. The effects of some of the government intervention is not necessarily, I wouldn't categorize them as stimulus. I would call it more like survival. Yes. So businesses are continuing to survive, but it's not clear at all that when we hit this winter, or maybe even next spring, it's not clear that this is going to be over by any stretch. And it doesn't appear that this is the type of kind of quick issue that will resolve itself with the numbers and with the significant size of this and the impact just globally and the spread of this terrible disease and the virus. It's terribly unfortunate that we're going through this, but I don't see a quick resolution to this. So the global financial order, very significant, very significant. Why? Well, if you look at the U.S. being the global financial center for the most part, and you look at the nature of their GDP, where call it 75% of their GDP being consumption-based, we've seen radical changes in consumption during this period of time. We've also seen radical changes in terms of spending and debt and savings. So where you would have had close to 0% savings or net negative savings for some of these areas, they're actually, now you're looking at the recent numbers in 1 month, it went from close to 0 to 32% savings rate. So massive changes, and that will have massive implications for financial institutions, the business, and where people are going to reallocate and position for the future. So I think it's a time of great change, and it can't be understated. We don't know that this is over. We don't know where it's going, and it could have very, very significant impacts for global financial stability. One of the issues that I think that is probably going to appear soon will be, the Federal Reserve is concerned about the stability of some of the banks, and some of them, they are making recommendations to cut their dividends, to not operate as usual. They're recognizing that there are risks in those portfolios. And you're seeing even the Canadian banks, you're seeing very, very significant reserves for bad loans that are coming forward. That has to impact there has to be a knock-on in terms of the larger investment community. And so I would think that ultimately you'll find that maybe a big financial intermediary will become distressed, because we've seen such radically strange markets where, I mean, everything from oil being, oil futures being negative $40 a barrel. Think about the implications for the derivatives market. And that market, even though in the global financial crisis, we thought that was really huge and out of control, and it might have been, over $600 trillion in terms of the derivatives we knew about, we thought that the whole market might have been over $1 quadrillion. Still, that market today is larger than it was then. The debt levels that we have today are much larger than what we had during the global financial crisis, from a corporate perspective, and also if you look at Canada within personal debt levels as well. So all of those things suggest that we are in a very different time. I think that people should expect very significant changes to global markets, and I don't think that ultimately that this will just be something that just passes quickly without any sort of issues. Without question, you're going to see big losses for the future. Now, governments have stepped in as much as they can to try and patch that over, but ultimately, I think you're going to find that there are financial stability issues, and we may see the specter of systemic risk as some of the big global financial institutions who may be too big to fail, maybe they start to have problems, and we start to worry in the same way we did in the global financial crisis about a cascade effect of dovetailing defaults and spreading economic crisis.
Thank you. You spoke a bit earlier today about, fintech going in the middle and large institutions going in the middle in terms of resetting competitive positioning. So what type of financial institutions do you think would be winning from the crisis, and which one consequently would be the loser from your perspective?
Well, I mean, it's a great question. There are, companies that have taken advantage of digital platforms, financial institutions that have really focused or invested in that, or invested in automated decision-making, artificial intelligence, machine learning. Those there will be significant benefits for some of those companies that should be pretty obvious in terms of their ability to operate on kind of a business continuity plan where you don't need to have physical processes in place to continue. So your business will continue. The other challenge may be for some of them, interestingly, is that they will have spent so much time building these kind of data science programs that in fact now you're going to find that some of that data isn't that valuable anymore. That has changed pretty radically. So if you are one of those companies that has developed certain programs or apps or things like that, you may find that it's going to give you the wrong answer now. So that you're going to look historically and you might say, well, what would be what should we expect for a retail investment? What should we expect for an investment in malls? If people really truly change what they're doing, then you're going to have a lot of data that's going to suggest that the average foot traffic in malls and the average spend in malls is a certain thing. And then we have something now that looks really very, very different. There will be a really big question about whether things go back to what you've called the new normal, whether they will. And there's evidence to suggest that when things continue on for long enough, habits may change. So you take the historical example of 9/11. 9/11, horrible crisis, horrible disaster. What did it change? It actually changed certain businesses really significantly. It changed how people consumed news. It changed it from print to visual because it was such a stark visual event that people really had struggled to grasp what was going on. And what was the implication? The implication for the publication business, the print business, bookstores and others, was that they were in an inexorable decline after that point, that people moved away from it. They consumed news because it was enough time that people stopped going to bookstores. They changed what they were doing. We're now in a position where 4 months later, people are struggling to think about what they're going to go back to. Are they going to go back to gyms? Are they going to go back to the mall? Are they still going to want to go get that same cup of coffee? Do they want the green cup, that green logo? Do they want something else? Are they going to do the same things? Are they going to go to the office anymore? Are we going to be driving as much? So I think that there are a number of these very significant issues. And what we know for sure is that in times where people are confident about the future and they feel confident that they will be doing better next year as opposed to this year, then they feel confident to take on leverage. They feel confident to borrow. And where they don't, what they tend to do is they hoard, they conserve as much as possible, and they try and pay down their debts. Now, we've seen that in the numbers that people are trying to pay down their debts whatever they can. Some are not in the position to be able to do that. So I think that our tipping point for the future will be in the months and even next year to come, to see what are the lasting implications of this. And when you have economies like the modern Western economies, the US, Europe, Canada, whatever, huge portion of that is consumption and what we are actually consuming. So that will be a really key question for finance and the implications of it. Right now, it appears that there's this huge amount of capital that is being stored. And what the normal thing would be for people to do isn't to just sit on cash, which is what they're doing now, but to invest. And the question will be, what do they invest in going forward? I would be surprised if they would feel comfortable going into the public debt and equity markets, given the valuations, given the historically high valuations that we have today, the historically low interest rates for the bond market, and the historically high price to earnings valuations for the equity markets. It seemed to me just a perfect recipe for very dangerous markets that could move very, very quickly in different directions. That would not be good for the smaller investors or even larger investors.
Thank you very much for your insight. So in terms of transformation, you alluded to large FI using tools, using hopefully more data and AI in taking decision. Anything else you see in terms of digital transformation that traditional FI might be going with in the future?
Well, yeah, I mean, interestingly, that people are going to have to realign their models and realign the decision making. So even if they have had, these models built, they're still going to really think about whether it's giving them the right answers or not. So historical answers from what was happening in July of 2019 would not be very good predictors of what's happening now. So even if you have made investments in those areas, I think that you're going to have to really re-examine them and you're going to have human oversight, make sure that there are intuitions that make sense for the decisions that your models are giving you. That's on kind of a banking, traditional financial institution level. And then for investors, I think it's as well. You really have to look very, very carefully at what the data you're using is and how reliable it is. If we are facing a true secular change in some of these really important areas, then your model should change as well. And it may give you historical decisions based upon a new world will probably be very bad decisions going forward. So I think that people should be conservative and really recognize that we're in something that has not ended, that is, in fact, it's expanding in some really important ways, that we may find that there are additional problems coming forward. And I wouldn't want to presume that this would be something that would end quickly. So what should the financial institutions be thinking about? They should be thinking about profound changes and profound investments in their digital platforms so that they can operate on kind of an indefinite basis going forward, given that we don't know when people are going to be able to return to the offices or if they will in the same way. Those things are really unclear. So smart institutions try and stay nimble, try and look for these new opportunities to take advantage of them, to make kind of, there are a variety of very interesting opportunities that have arisen. There are certain strategies without question that are going to be very successful going forward. But the traditional ones, the traditional big ones that have worked in the past, where we're at the end of a, call it the 20+ year bull bond market. Are we going to see any sort of, are we at a change there? Are we at a change in terms of the height of the equity markets? I suspect that this crisis is not over, and I suspect that the implications for some of the more traditional managers and institutions will be very significant. So I would look for diversification in times of change. I'd look for being nimble, trying to be entrepreneurial. If you are a big bank, you'd really want to break it up to make sure that you capture the entrepreneurial spirit in some of these areas to take advantage of these new opportunities. And if you're a fintech, you should be really taking your regulatory responsibilities very, very seriously. You should start to move in the direction of being that next generation financial institution. I've been an advisor to different institutions as well, and they're very smart technologists, very good people, not lots of experience in understanding how unforgiving financial services can be to kind of junior or novice mistakes in that area. You really have to take your regulatory and legal responsibilities very, very seriously as you move that. So you move from just a fintech with an idea or some sort of application to a financial institution, to a new financial institution, and you really, really have to take that seriously. So there are a variety of things that you need to do with that, everything from the legal aspect, from hiring the right people, from having the right infrastructure, from taking the right cybersecurity steps, and ensuring that you're building not just a fintech, but a financial institution for the future. Because in a way, I think we're all kind of moving in that direction, and what people should expect is lots more competition for that. Now, the good news may be that we have an expanding investment pool. We have an expanding market in some ways, but you need to recognize that competitors, whether they're fintechs or whether they're financial institutions, are looking at cutting down on those fixed costs as much as possible. So even if you don't think that you need to take those steps, you think that your business model is fine today, I would suggest you really look at that carefully, because the ground under your feet, the competitive landscape may be changing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm totally with you on that. And to your point, we're still in the first innings, even if it's like it's been long already. And I think the impact is going to be way more significant than what we see right now. So it seems to me people are going back to normal, while actually it's like, okay, well, there's an earthquake that happened here. The building have just not collapsed on you yet. But
That's right.
something.
I think it's more like, it's kind of like a tsunami, right? It's that we've had this unbelievable event where the ocean dropped 10 feet and then rise up, and we think, wow, that was really scary and big earthquake. But then the real damage is what will roll through. Now, governments have taken extraordinary steps to try and delay that impact and to try and to manage things. But because if you think about all of these different businesses, in just about every sector, there have just been unbelievably massive changes, whether you're talking about commercial real estate or the energy sector, like just taking the energy sector. I mean, look at the United States was the largest producer of oil in the world as of January of this year. Now, the majority of that is just completely turned off. That sector is just suffering in a massive way. And we're starting to see really significant bankruptcies coming forward and restructurings about that. That's the kind of implications that we can expect for the future. We're going to be living with some of the impacts of that, and even smaller kind of loans where we would expect businesses to be challenged. Imagine like all of the restaurants that were really struggling, or just breaking even. All of a sudden, we've added huge amounts of debt on that. Now, maybe we've supported them so that there isn't a direct bankruptcy right away, but there's lots and lots of bankruptcies that are coming forward. There's lots of distress. So it is a very difficult time, and people need to recognize that, as you say, we're in the first inning. This is not contained, and that the implications of this will likely be generational. This is like the Great Depression, and the impacts that will happen for the future simply haven't been felt yet. But how big could this be? Nations could be downgraded. I mean, Canada has already been downgraded by certain, by certain investors, and these are very, very strange times. So we are looking at very significant secular changes in what we're doing and how we're doing it. So I think that you can't understate how significant this is, or the fact that we really don't truly understand what the implications will be. The truth about the financial crisis was we didn't really understand how significant it was until Lehman Brothers collapsed. Mm-hmm. Now, the real event happened in 2007. Lehman Brothers goes down September 15th, 2008. And if we remember, during that period of time, strangely, we had a bull market. We were up. People thought this was okay. Now, the entire global economy was on the brink of collapse, but we didn't see it until that catalytic event happened and revealed it. So I still think that there are more of those really significant events to come, whether that's on a sovereign level, sub-sovereign, or even very important financial services or corporate, that could trigger significant issues for the future. And that's wound up within the complexity of the epidemiology of the virus, of the trajectory of how well we deal with this, how well we're able to contain it, but also, is this something that's going to change? We know that we have a variety of different strains of this virus. We don't know what the trajectory of this will be. We don't know how many stages or how many waves we'll face for the future. We know that historically, every major pandemic has always had a second wave, and usually a third wave or more. So it's unclear whether we are calling victory too soon right now in reopening. I think that we have to take this very, very seriously and recognize that we have a morphing issue economically, as well as a connected medical issue that is morphing as well.
So last question for you, which is probably a lighter question. So in terms of transformation, what have been the changes that you've seen yourself from a personal perspective in the last few months?
Well, this has been a very strange time. And so it transitioned from teaching in person, from traveling and going. I was in an artificial intelligence conference in New York in early March, and so I enjoyed traveling and doing that. All of that has obviously ended. We started teaching, and I started off teaching at the university in person, and then that suddenly translated to online. Now, fortunately for me, I'd been a little bit familiar with those kinds of kind of mediums for reaching students or reaching clients, things like that. I guess it's been transformative for me because I used to not engage nearly as much in terms of virtually with people around the world. I used to think that if I had to go and talk to someone, then I would have to go and fly to London or wherever to talk to people or to meet with them to build that kind of rapport. Now I recognize that I don't think that that's true, and I work with people in Germany and all over the world. I mean, easily talking to people who could be next door to you or, in Texas. And sometimes it feels like people are just next door. And then you find out that, in fact, they're, thousands of miles away. So to me, it's kind of opened up certain doors, made me realize that you don't need the same office space. You don't need the same infrastructure maybe you needed in the future. And then on the positive, it has been challenging from a personal perspective in some way, but I would say there's a little bit of everyone feeling like they're cooped up too much, and we need to get out and kind of socialize. I'd very much like to see some of my extended family and kind of give them a hug or have a picnic or a barbecue or something. But I want them to be safe most of all. It has reinforced the importance of family and certain friends. And so I find that there are certain very nice things that have developed out of this, whether that's going for a walk 6 feet apart with friends, or even colleagues or business associates. I find that's one of the very nice things about it. Getting more fresh air. I think people are getting, believe it or not, the more children go outside and playing, wanting to go to the park, wanting to go and play games in the park. And so to me, I think that there are certain benefits associated with that. I also believe that it has reinforced the importance of nature. So even though we're going to get through this crisis, and I believe there's a lot of hope, it's just about finding the right strategies that get us through these challenging times, and recognizing those changes to the new normal so that we can operate successfully. But once we get through this crisis, it should give us the discipline and the kind of heart to face the new problems. The bigger problems that are looming on the horizon, I think of as the challenge to climate and other issues that are there. So to me, very smart things to think about for the future would be how do we think about solving some of those larger problems? We know that they're waiting for us. We know that we've got to face them and deal with them. So it's made me a little bit more reflective and think about how should we be living? What is really important? How much is consumption? Does that really change our lives? And then you suddenly realize when you're not going out and you're not going to restaurants and you're not spending, you can find a different way. That dramatically cuts down on your consumption, on your impact on the earth. And in fact, maybe that's the point that we should be really thinking about, that for the future in financial services and all other industries, we should be really thinking about ESG and the environmental impact for the future, to make sure that they're socially sustainable, and then governance issues that are just kind of our bread and butter, that to take that more seriously. I think that any fintech that really thinks along those lines is kind of on the right path. And as well, large institutions that are thinking that way, I think can do very well to make a positive impact and be part of the next generation of finance, rather than just, looking back on something that was an aberration at the time. Like, look, we look back on the excesses of investment banking prior to the global financial crisis. People may look back on the excesses of some of these industries prior to COVID. And we should be prepared for that, to recognize that things are changing, but we have the opportunity to address some of these challenges. So for me, that's been the learning experience of what's really important, that certain aspects of family and friends and the improved use of technology, I think, are really big, important takeaways to think about what our real future objectives are and how do we meet those. Because in this downtime, financial institutions have a wonderful opportunity to use this time to transform some of their businesses, to change the way they do things. I saw, I had to go to my bank. I had something I needed to go to my bank, and I was standing in line wearing a mask, and I saw a 90-year-old lady walk in with a walker, struggling to walk, and she walked in and said very loudly to everyone, "I need someone to show me how to use online banking." Because now that is something that probably never would have happened. That was someone that probably never intended to use this. They were very comfortable doing it, but now all of a sudden things are changing. Now that was a hard walk for her, but that's the type of change that I think is happening in the world. And I think that as we're thinking about what the transformation is for us personally, that transformation is going to happen on a larger scale in financial services and in all of the sectors that we're looking at. So.
Thank you so much, John, for connecting the dots and really giving this macro view. It was very, very insightful. I really enjoyed our conversation. So you might be coming back in 3-6 months when I'm doing the new normal.
Sounds great. Well, thank you very much, Peggy. It's a really
Thank
pleasure.
you very much. Have a fantastic day, John. Thank
All
you.
right, thank you. Bye-bye.